Hi, this is Kashish. Welcome to a new episode of Business Odyssey.
Hello, we are Lashmi and Laura, partners in the journey of building communities of practice. Thank you for joining us, where we focus on exploring the human-centric approach while we consider all the variables that affect it, from the learning and development, performance change processes, leadership and coaching, diversity and inclusion, and other key topics as well. Today, we are joined by Mark Doughty, an HR consultant, Organisational Development and Talent Director based in the UK, with a focus in building extraordinary teams and leading with excellence. We talk about how leadership has evolved, the diverse situational skill set that a person must have, legacy, and more. Happy learning. Hello, Mark. Happy to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. And what about if you introduce yourself? I think you are going to do better than me.
I'm Mark. I've been in and around learning, leadership, management, development nearly all of my career. Typically working for a number of big corporates globally. From my early career days working for a UK retailer called Sainsbury's, which you may have heard of, then through to insurance companies, then global companies such as Hitachi, and then working in telephonics with organizations such as Dell and Motorola. I spent the best part of 5 years working for Deutsche Bank, and then I went more independently working for Tate & Lyle and Marshall Aerospace, which are companies in the UK. And then, I spent time off being a stay-at-home dad. So I took a career change in 2017 to look after, at the time, 2 babies. One was 6 months old and one was 18 months old. So, yeah, I've gone through a personal and professional development experience myself in recent times.
Yes, indeed. So maybe after I will refresh that. Maybe before we start talking about the topic,
yeah,
can you share, if that's okay with you, can you share what is the best thing, or in plural as well, that has happened to you in all these years, if we are talking about from the professional side as well as the personal side?
Gosh, I think when you ask that question, your mind goes off racing and thinking of a number of different things that either would resonate with people who hear you and I talking, or just have relevance for what can only be described as a very, changing world at the best of times. The world doesn't. The world these days seems to be changing almost constantly. Whereas I think back to my early days and early career, it felt a little bit more stable. I think in terms of real successes for me would be, and I'll call on 2, one personal, one professional. One, that I left school very young, 15. I left school with no qualifications. In fact, I walked out of school on my last day actually having no qualifications to my name whatsoever, and had a job to go and join the Royal Navy, and thought I was about to be, sail the 7 seas and have a successful career in the Royal Navy for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And within a short period of time, I think 6 weeks into my time in the Royal Navy, I failed a particular test. It wasn't a particular rewarding experience, failing a test in an armed forces, as I'm sure you can realize. And in reality, I grew very quickly. All of a sudden, I knew that any bluffing or any stories I may have been good at telling at school to hide my inadequacies at school weren't going to resonate in the armed forces. So I had to change my mindset and mentality overnight as a young man at 16. And really, there's a saying which perhaps is best has come from the movie Apollo 13, where the phrase is "failure is not an option." And at 16, I learned that failure is not an option, because literally the experience I was going through was that I couldn't fail again. From a personal point of view, I met somebody called Emma in 2013. She is the love of my life. I feel like I'm back at school. I work here, in terms of, when I'm doing any sort of thoughts and reading and stuff, I come into my little office in the garden, which is this. And we text each other 20, 30 times a day, even though we're in the same house. We have two great children. We laugh every day. It feels a love story, and more importantly, I feel I'm very fortunate to have found her. She has transformed my life, and I feel very honored and blessed to be a part of her life.
Thank you so much for sharing those best things that happened to you. And how do I put it this way? From those situations, what can you share with us about how do you connect those situations with the topic today, that is leadership?
I think the sort of the common thread, or the red thread through this, is that there's and I learned the hard way too through career. If I think about some of the roles I've had through my career, I lost my job 2 or 3 times through redundancies or whatever, and that in itself meant that I had to really start to think things through in terms of what was next for me in terms of my role and my career at that time. I was in my first marriage. I had 2 young children there as well, so all of a sudden, you can't be you can't be selfish. You've got to think about that wider piece. So if I translate that through to leadership, I think for me there's another saying that I would say, certainly when you're a leader or a manager, you're on stage 24/7, 364 days, 365 days a year. And I think for me, I had to be likewise on stage, both as a partner, a parent to young children, and I like to think that I role modeled that as best I could. That's not to say I didn't have any, my good and bad days, like everybody. We all have them, but I'd like to think there were more good days, and that there was a legacy that I left as part of being a parent. And also, from a leadership point of view, for me, it's all about the legacy you leave. Have you moved either your team or your organization into a better place than the environment in which you inherited? And if that then is in the principle of thinking that through, and you can answer that wholeheartedly, yes, then yes, there's always going to be other people who may have a different view on whether you did do that. But I think in your own self-talk, you can say, I can hold my head up and high and say, yeah, most jobs, most situations, most scenarios, most relationships, I'd like to think that I was reasonably good and skilled at what I did. And that's not to say I haven't learned from what I did and didn't do, but overall, I am the man today because I was humble in terms of some of the experiences I went through, and B, I always was conscious of the wider people in which I was either supporting, and C, I was respectful of that being on stage 24/7. I had to lean into and act into a role that I had either inherited myself as a partner or a husband or a parent, or in terms of the roles I did in terms of leading other people.
Right. So I have one key word that you have said, but I will talk about that later.
Okay.
Legacy. But right now, I mean, we are talking about leadership. So
Mm.
the first thing actually is to note from your perspective what leadership means today, actually. And then maybe we can move forward to how leadership has evolved based on your experience for the last 20 years.
Mm. I think in many ways, the nature of leadership hasn't necessarily changed. I would say perhaps from what I observe and what I read and what I see, certainly today, leadership perhaps is more easily challenged and questioned and called out, whereas perhaps 30 years ago, leadership was something a bit more linear. You could plan for it. You could sort of have a, I can remember working in my first job once I left the Navy and moved into a retailing role and became a personnel manager there, that leadership planning and development was all a structured process that you developed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you could almost predict with some certainty not only what the capability required for leadership was going to be, that you could also test and check and question potential people in the pipeline to prepare them. Today, that is just simply not the case. I mean, you only have to take the news on a regular basis, as we said at the start of the call, in terms of just how volatile the world is. And I'm bearing in mind what we've also been through in terms of COVID, and I know that's a common conversation perhaps in terms of post-COVID. But if we just think of how COVID has changed the landscape in terms of people lead in that respect, in terms of now all of a sudden we have this language called hybrid working, or and to a large extent that wasn't the case. I mean, I know that colleagues that I talk to, or network friends that I speak to, if I think back to when I was last at work, there were phones on the desk, and now all of a sudden, here you are and I, we're no longer talking via a phone. We're talking through a headset, and it's all through this thing called Teams. And so, the very nature of being a leader all of a sudden isn't doing a town hall, although you still do them, or being a leader isn't about having a strategy or a mission, although we still have them. Actually, now being a leader is in the moment, and you're called to be a leader in the moment constantly, and it's very immediate. You have to respond in that moment in time. And actually, to prepare leaders, I suspect for many organizations, I think that they use the word, is it VUCA, the VUCA, the VUCA world, whereby all of a sudden, actually, many leaders are leaning into scenarios and events that are very ambiguous and have no end game. And I think it's Simon Sinek who talks about the infinite mindset, and I think that's very powerful, because again, going back to my early days, leadership was perhaps a time-bound thing. I would lead a particular project, I would lead a particular integration, I would be in this particular leadership role before I moved into my next role. Now organizations are all about, well, I might be leading this as my day-to-day job, I may also be leading a project, I've also got to lead a team of people who I don't see on a day-to-day basis. I also then have to create a leadership mindset whereby my own self-talk is to be a great role model and leading people, but I'm having to do that through a medium that perhaps I've only started to learn over the last 2 years, and all of a sudden I'm having to use behavior and sort of gestures that I'm not necessarily used to. So how is my image understood, and how is my personality and persona referenced with the people I lead? Leadership today is there's so many unwritten rules, and I still don't think we know. I think potentially in time, organizations will look back at this period, post the early days post-COVID, whereby there perhaps will be some celebration of saying, well, we got through it, but I'm not too sure how we got through it.
So actually, I I was thinking about what are, and I'm not sure if I must call that way, but let's say it's right now, and maybe then we refresh. But based on that, what are the skills, if we have to put it a name, that an individual has to manage when they find in a leadership role?
Today, you mean, in terms of
Yes.
this? Well, I think and I'm making that to some extent. This perhaps it plays out in other parts of the world, but certainly in Europe. My answer to your question would be, my lens is more from talking to friends, etc., from a European perspective. Well, first of all, we have to recognise that we have 4 generations at work. So we have the baby boomers from the 60s to the Generation Zs, in the latter or the early noughties. So all of a sudden, having 4 generations at work is, I think, is a particular challenge for leaders. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, the baby boomers, like myself, perhaps look for leaders in terms of structure and content and acting in a certain way, because literally leadership has been so well defined over the years in terms of whether it be leadership programs that you might find at a Harvard or any particular business school around the world. Leadership was very clearly defined, and we all got sucked into what that leadership looked like. If you were to talk to a Gen Z, Gen Y sort of person today, my suspicions would be that they would see leadership as totally different to that. I understand areas like ESG now are more important to Gen Ys and Gen Zs. I understand that they don't follow their parents' lifestyle of working and commuting 12, 13, 14 hours a day, because they used to see that, and then they used to see their parents being spit out by organizations because they'd made a mistake and their parents were made redundant. So the Gen Ys and Gen Zs don't necessarily fall for the fables and the stories that some leaders sort of allow themselves to discuss with their people. And as a result, I think the Gen Ys and Gen Zs are more discerning, they're more questioning, they're more rebellious, perhaps more rebellious than I was at work. And I think that's difficult for some leaders to handle. I think because I think there is an area where the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs become sort of very rule bound and very questioning of what organizations are doing and hold them to account more so than any other perhaps employees and colleagues have done before. And that demands a different way of leading the leaders. All of a sudden, instead of the leaders thinking that employees will believe them, because that's what leaders, a good leader will hopefully have, and have that followership. Today, I suspect leading now is about trying to convince people and trying to have a sense of purpose and what the organization is all about. And as Simon Sinek talks about, what's the why? What is the why? And if you're not very good at a leader explaining the why and being clear on the purpose, then you've already lost the battle. So if that helps shape the conversation in this part of our call, then that's where I think there is a big difference. Today, we have a more discerning, as if the leaders in organizations have to work with more discerning, more critical, more challenging employees than any other leader has had before.
Can I add, at least this point of view from this side of the world to that. I have kind of experience, and I have seen both actually. Yes. One is the different generation actually that start asking the why. It doesn't matter. If you are baby boomer or a millennial, they are starting Y, and the leadership are not prepared to answer that question. So they leave the organization because they don't feel like they are having a purpose there. And then there are other people that they know the why. They don't have the full resources, because here is different when it comes to resources. So nevertheless, I mean, they state at an organization that the leaderships can answer the why. It doesn't matter if you are a baby boomer, a generation Y or Z, or a millennial as well. My point with this is we have both, but when it comes to the second situation, there are just only few people here that we have seen that have the skill to manage with difference and communicate well with different generations. And the other point with that is I would like to see more people like that. And I would like to see, not just here, but over the world, actually. Could be, some people could see like an utopia right now, while I'm saying, but the important or to understand actually that building those kind of long-term relationship and those kinds of trust has an impact on how do you lead, actually, and in particular with the different generations. So that's what we see from this side of the world, actually.
I think we're not, there's there's similarity. I think maybe just to build on what you said and maybe offer some new narrative to the story. I think being a leader today is, there's no sort of, if I again think back to my early days, if I was doing leadership development, I'll be talking about Maslow's hierarchy from the 50s and McGregor's theory of motivation and the Maslow's pyramid, etc., and Hertzberg's theory. There's all these theories, all these models, and we could put our leaders through and we could get a sense of, well, this is, if you want to do X or Y or do A, B, or C as a leader, then these are the models, these are the frameworks, and this will make you a great leader. I mean, I know I'm embellishing the story a bit, but you get a sense. Where do leaders get their models from today? Where do leaders get their stories from today? Where do leaders get their sort of guidance from today? Because I don't see business schools doing any of this stuff, in terms of, say, helping leaders communicate to a greater audience. If we look at, from some of the material I either research or read, you'll see that, whether it be TikTok or Instagram, that I think even if I take the UK, there's an interesting stat in the UK that says by this time next year, 55% of the working population in the UK will be either Gen Y or Gen Z. So now how do that group get their information? That group get their information through networks. They get their information through platforms of technology. And yet most of the senior leaders in organizations probably don't even know what TikTok is, or even don't use Facebook or Instagram. And I know Facebook perhaps is a bit old now for some of this generation, but there will be other apps, there'll be other platforms coming down the road. So how do you create followership as a leader now then? How do you convince them on the why? How do you get a sense of purpose across when actually there is a distrust of you as a leader? I mean, if you think of, again, from my own experience back in the time, organizations tended to perhaps avoid certain questions of leaders around, for employees to say, well, how much do you trust your leaders? Or how much do you have faith in your leaders? How much do you sort of aspire to follow what your leaders are directing you towards? I mean, the sort of essence and the sharpness of those questions need to play out today in an organization where it's just an infinite day. Today will be no different, will be very different compared to yesterday. And whether it be the news or this or that, everything, the whole day can't be planned. It's so ambiguous. It's sort of, you can't even predict with some certainty what will be happening next week to fluctuations in stock markets or prices or volumes. So it's almost like saying the childhood story about the emperor has no clothes. Why would I, as a 20-year-old something, believe in you, Mark, as a 40-year-old something, if about what's going to happen next week? Because you don't know. But perhaps, of course, 30, 40 years ago, we could predict leadership because we could predict the future to some extent. Now we can't. And so there's a total different skill set for leaders about being more humble, about not knowing the answer, about not knowing. And it's about creating that sort of followership in a totally different way, which I don't feel many leaders are prepared for or even prepared to accept, because the default position is to if you look at the business schools today, and if you look at some of the leadership books today, it's all about traditional ways of leading, not leading in a post-COVID world.
I'm here.
It's all right.
So, actually, so what would we say? I mean, to summarize, what would you say that those skill sets are? I mean, it's not just one, because they are changing while the days or the weeks or the months are changing. So that right now, when it's come, even you said it before with the hybrid workplace. So what is the impact that having those skills or not having those skills, or developing those skills or not developing those skills? What is the impact that has on the person that is leading, and of course within the team and the organization?
What springs to mind when you ask that question, and certainly when I've had other conversations again with friends in recent weeks and months, as we do, I would put a leadership role today on a par or similar to the role of a conductor of an orchestra.
I see.
So the conductor of the orchestra is sort of the one who sets the rhythm, who sets the beat, and brings people in and out of the music that's being played, in order for the orchestra as a whole to create a beautiful piece of work. And if I transcend that story into work, I'd say a leader is exactly the same, because all of a sudden, a conductor is not expected to play musical instruments, and likewise a leader isn't expected to know everything about the organization anymore, because they can't, because it's just too, the amount of change that's going on and the amount of sort of issues that they have to respond to. They don't have the knowledge or the experience or the wisdom in order to solve a particular issue or problem, but they can guide, and they can bring people in and out, and they can play the tune accordingly. And that for me is where leadership has to be now. It has to be that sort of still on the platform if you want to, or still on the stage, still someone to go to, still someone who potentially can offer you a few insights and wisdom, and still someone who can coach and give you some feedback, maybe a little bit higher this time, a little bit lower next time, or come in a little bit quicker. That's where I see leadership today, almost in the moment coaching, in the moment sort of observations, in the moment thinking, bringing group think together, but with this in the spirit of, I don't know the answer, but I will I will love you, I will care for you, I will encourage you, I will I will have your back. But directionally, this is where I think we need to go. Directionally, this is where I think we need to be, what we need to be focused on. Directionally, these are the sort of passions I have. Directionally, this is the sort of thing I know what success looks like. But it's over to you as my musicians to create the music for me, because I can only bring part of the story together. And if this conductor of the orchestra model makes sense as we talk, then that's it's spiritually in my head where I think leaders have to be. They can no longer be this sort of person at the front of an organization who has all the knowledge and knows what's going to happen next, because they simply don't.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work as a model for you?
Yeah, actually it resonates with me, the orchestra, because actually I was when I was in Saudi, I actually saw a documentary about the first woman that is the leader of that orchestra, and she's well known in the industry, but it's the first one, and she fought against all the paradigms. Sorry, and she is well known on the industry. And what are the resources? What are the techniques that she used and she used today actually to build the team, to teach others to have the same role as she? So from that point of view, yes, it resonates with me. And from the organizational level, yes. I mean, yes, you have to be curious enough to know what the organization is, what are all the stakeholders, what's the business do, what's the impact that the business has, not only on the people, but within the customer, within the society, and so on. And you have to be humble enough to say, I don't know, I don't have the answer. And that's okay. It's not bad, actually. That tells me that you are open to learn, actually.
Sorry. No, I think I think the employees, colleagues, whatever the right phrase is in organization these days, I think there's a lot to be said to be saying I don't know. There's a lot to be said to be humble, because actually I made a mistake then, and I need you to get me back on track. There's that sort of nature, that style of leadership, which is important, because there is an expectation, as I say, because of the Gen Y and the Gen Z people in our organizations, they will no longer stand for that direct sort of command and control leadership, or even the more softer side of command and control, and talk about mission and strategy and all that sort of good stuff. That papers came out in the 90s and the 2000s, and I think there was a book in around about 2010, which I think it was in the UK specifically, and the title of the book was "Why Should Anybody Be Led by You?"
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I think it's almost like saying, well, what if that is an exam question in 2010? Why should anybody be led by you? What's the exam question for 2022? I don't know. But, I put it to yourselves and your colleagues and the audience who are listening today. Why should anybody be led by you? Is that the right question to be asking in 2022, or is there something a bit more powerful? I think there's something a bit more powerful, but in the spirit of me thinking here, I can't necessarily think.
Yes. Maybe we can leave that to the audience, so we get feedback about that. So I would like to talk about two topics. One is how do you, because I really think that it's important, and still today it's misunderstanding. Communication with leadership. How do you connect, and how do you put it to work together side by side to do the to actually leading you, leading others as well. And I will left the other one to the end.
In some ways, it may well be a contradiction to what we've already talked about. In some ways, I don't necessarily think the communicating as a leader as that has changed that much, because my experience is most leaders are still rubbish at doing it anyway. Mm-hmm. And so if we were to just take some of the basic or bare essentials of communicating, build rapport with me, get to know me, get a sense about my values and what's important. If you are that, if people buy into the idea of the conductor of the orchestra idea, or even anything else, then that there are still some leadership communication skills that are still important around that rapport, getting to know the musicians, getting to know what's important to them in terms of values and beliefs. Even just say on this scenario today, when I look at the news, or when I join some web conferences, or when I see people talking, as I say, on the news, we seem to have lost the art of looking at the camera. There is a camera on our computer. It's right in front of us, and it really helps cement that relationship straight away by looking in at that camera. And the amount of people I see on calls and presentations who don't look at the camera, they're sometimes looking over here or they're looking over there, and that's within their gift. Either they must be missing a point, but surely they know that if they're not looking at the person they're talking to. And I just notice it next time we either watch the news or somebody coming in, or you go on a team conference call or something, or you join a web seminar, which I try and do on a regular basis, just to keep me, apart from looking after children, I just try and keep myself up to speed with everything. And I would say there's a good 50-60% of people still look a different way. So for me, the art of communication has not really changed, apart which is just do some of the basics right. Build rapport, get to know people, understand their values, recognize what's important to them, look at them in their eye, have some good sort of rapport in reflecting how they're behaving to you, recognize some of their feelings, how you're feeling today, are you really sure you're feeling okay today, asking some smart questions, because increasingly being I always say, I used to say that leadership's a contact sport. Leadership is a contact sport. You can't do leadership separate. You can't be separate from it. It's like rugby. It's like football. It's a contact
totally
sport.
agree.
It's the contact sport. So a contact sport means, you need to get in and amongst people, and to feel that contact. And contact doesn't necessarily mean just touching someone. But how do you touch people on teams? How does that come out in conversations you have as a leader in an organization? How do you touch people on a day-to-day basis? And you touch people in the words you use, and the tone of your voice, and the mannerisms and the behavior and how you conduct yourself on the camera. And it's these little nuances, these little things in who you are as an individual that make a big difference to the other person at the end of the camera.
Yes.
But they're just the same behaviors as if you're in the office. I used to say to leaders when I worked at the bank, Deutsche Bank, you have a choice in a morning when you walk through the door whether you say good morning or not to those on reception. You have a choice when you get into the lift, or whether you say good morning to the person or the people in the lift, or ignore them and put your eyes down. You have a choice as soon as you leave the lift, and who you meet in the corridor, and who you don't speak to and who you do speak to. Each of those points, and you probably heard the phrase before, is a moment of truth. And each of the moment, each of the, and as a result of that moment of truth, it's as a leader, it's not about what you said, and it's not about what you did, but it's about how you made people feel.
Mm-hmm.
And you are you're not only as a leader today, you're not only in a contact sport, but you're in the feeling game, and you're in the feeling game more than anything else before.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to consciously, in my belief, you have to consciously work at it daily, especially now in hybrid working environments.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100% agree on that. Mm-hmm. So my last question is also related between leadership and that word you said, that is legacy. From what I have been seeing, first, I have to say that I'm a big fan of the All Blacks and of the book that James Kerr wrote about them. So that's what is resonate with me. But I have other colleagues that are from there, actually they live in Saudi and they live in England as well, that they are like in the phase of retirement. Actually, one of them is in Canada, but they are on the stage that they are thinking of the retirement. And just the short conversation that we have actually is about the legacy that they have built. But the conversation stopped there, and we didn't go a step forward, which I plan to do actually. But right now, I think both of them are connected when you are a leader. And so if you can share, because you said the word before I asked, actually, if you can share what's the meaning for you when it comes to leadership, and what are the impact that they have as well, and how do you see both connected?
Yeah. Well, I'll build on your story of the All Blacks, because you may be aware of there is a book about the All Blacks called Legacy.
Yes, I have it. I read it like twice or maybe 3 times actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So you'll be familiar with the phrase "sweep the sheds."
Yes.
Okay. So for the listeners who aren't familiar with the phrase, "sweep the sheds" is all about the All Blacks would look after themselves, so they don't need anybody else to look after them. And that isn't about them being arrogant or sort of disrespectful to other people. It's actually the complete opposite. And they have a purpose or a way of being, which says that when we go into a dressing room, we will leave the dressing room far cleaner than when we arrive. And if you can think about rugby players, I don't know how many's in a rugby team. I'm not necessarily a rugby player myself, but I don't know, 20, 30 people, 30 players potentially. And you can imagine the mess it is. But perhaps, the story here is leaders of old would expect other people to tidy up after them. And the All Blacks have a view which says, no, we'll tidy up our own mess, and we will look after ourselves, and we'll look after each other. And as a result, when people come back into the changing room, there'll be a legacy which says, oh my God, this changing room is immaculate. So if that's the brand, the All Blacks perhaps have created as them in their legacy, then for me to translate that story into leadership, I think you can do it in a couple of ways. I mean, for those leaders listening on today or on the call would say, I'd ask you a couple of questions. One question would be, what do people say about you when you leave the room or leave the pool? So if you're on a Teams call or you're in a team meeting, what do people say about you when you leave the pool? And how do you know what they say about you? Because whatever they say about you is your brand. And your brand will go before you and stay with you as long as you're in that organization. And so I would always be attuned to that brand that you have, just like the All Blacks brand in terms of their legacy. Another question I'd ask leaders in terms of their own legacy is to think about how have you, and it's a bit of a cliche question, especially at times like this when I'm talking to you. The question would simply be around how have you made a difference in the spirit of your time being here in the organization? What is either substantially changed, or what has been made, or where has the difference been created, either in terms of how the organization has responded to its customers, or how it's served its clients, or the impact it's had on society. So, think about your difference in terms of customers, clients, and society. And very often, I suspect leaders struggle with that, and because I can think back to days when I've worked with leaders, and we always used to go in and say, okay, well, what's your strategy? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And I somewhat got wise to that, because of course leaders always like to tell you what they're going to do, or what difference they're going to make, or what impact they're going to drive. And for me, a legacy question is also asking a leader, well, what are you not going to do? What are you going to make sure you don't? Where are the boundaries? Where are the limits to what you will and won't do? Where are where is the red line? Where is it that you will make sure that when it comes to it, you will uphold or sort of protect certain areas? Because very often when leaders can describe what they're not going to do, apart from the fact that they struggle with it, if you ask a leader, what are you not going to do? My bet is they will take some time to answer it. But usually when they do answer it, it creates more clarity, because they're clear about what they're not going to do, than it does do about what they are going to do. That's the converseness of the question. By asking a leader what you're not going to do is more powerful in terms of understanding what their legacy potentially is going to be.
I see. Thank you so much for that. So if we have to, I don't want to put it that way, but if we have to summarize your learnings across all these years when it comes to leadership, what will you share with us?
From the personal experiences, that leadership is a journey, and as a result, it's not so much the destination, but who you're on the journey with. And it's you've probably heard that statement before, but for me, it has been a journey. You are in even more so today, you're in a world that is very infinite. So there's no stop and start. It's just continuous. And how you show up each day is a personal choice in terms of the people you greet, the people you say hello to, and your level of engagement in that. Somewhere along the line, you need to have some mental strength to carry you through the good days and the bad days. Mine, as a 16-year-old boy, was failure is not an option. And I just got very good at being attuned to that. But equally, later in life, I also realized failure is a good thing, because sometimes when you get it wrong or it doesn't work, you can learn from it. I think the balance in all that is that as you navigate this world, this very complex world, the realization is that the more you can be a conductor of people and know how to create the right rhythm and the right drumbeat and allow people to go off and be the special people they can be when you get that team right, then you build a legacy that is very hard to either replicate and certainly from an organizational point of view, it's very hard for people to copy, because ultimately there is a uniqueness about you as a leader that has honed a way of working with people, and because it's a contact sport, and it's a contact way of being you as a leader, and surprisingly, still today, most people are not very good at leading people.
Mm-hmm.
And if we all think back to our times when we've enjoyed our work or enjoyed our careers, we can probably think of one or two people who have really made a difference. So actually, when one or two people really make a difference, the legacy is quite profound. And actually, that's the opportunity for everybody who is either thinking about being a manager or a leader, or even someone who is coming to your point about those in retirement. You can still have a legacy into retirement. You can still have a legacy until your final breath. And for me, it's all about how you build relationships with people, and how you manage those moments of truth. Because ultimately, whilst we don't need to worry about what people say about us in the purest sense, we need to be mindful of the shadow we leave in the organizations and within the people we work with, if we want to be successful in life and in our careers.
Mm-hmm. It's a moment of reflection right now. So I want to thank you, Mark, for your time, for sharing all this personal and professional knowledge and experience. So here my last question to you. Where do people can reach you out?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So if anything, I'd say go and connect with me on LinkedIn, primarily because I had quite a strong LinkedIn database up until 4 or 5 years ago. And then unfortunately, my network, when I became a stay-at-home dad looking after a 6-month-old, LinkedIn wasn't necessarily needed. It was more about, how do I change nappies in the back of a car when I haven't got a nappy and it's pouring down with rain. We've all been there for those of us who've got children. So I would say LinkedIn is the best place for me to find me. And I'm always curious about teams and helping leaders lead great teams, and anybody who's got any insights or thoughts, I'd always welcome them connecting to me on LinkedIn.
Great. So we will put that on the episode description as well. So people and the audience, we will see that. So thank you so much, Mark. Has been a pleasure. Hope you are enjoying your afternoon.
Yes.
Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, and look after yourself, Laura, too, and nice to have spent time with you today.
You too, and your family.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone who makes these podcasts possible. In particular, thanks to the guest speakers and to you who are on the other side listening. If you liked it and were able to learn something new today, we invite you to share it with your entire network. We also invite you to subscribe to our different channels to follow our latest news. If you are interested in being part of these series, you can apply by clicking on the link that is in the general presentation of the podcast. Until next time.
A special thanks to the voice, Kashish Wadhwani.